Hi, thanks for tuning in again. This is the second lecture for the demonstration speech series. And in this lecture, we will talk about the organization of your demonstration speech and how you will be putting this kind of speech into an outline. I've already shown this slide if you tuned in to the previous PowerPoint lecture on the demonstration speech, but I just wanted to review a few things again because it never hurts to just have these things thrown at you multiple times so that you do get an awesome grade on your demonstration speech. Again, the demonstration speech should be 5 to 7 minutes, and it should show an action. It should show us how to do something, and it should have a clear beginning and an end. And what I mean when you are demonstrating an action with a beginning and an end is that you shouldn't just generally show an audience how to play the guitar. Just saying, I'm going to teach you how to play the guitar today is not something that you're going to be able to successfully accomplish in 5 to 7 minutes. So you want to think a little bit, you want to bring that topic in a little bit and think about maybe you could do a speech on how to change a guitar string, because that is something that you can teach your audience in 5 to 7 minutes, and it does have a clear beginning and an end. You also will need to incorporate a visual aid into this speech. You'll be working with probably most of you will be working with some sort of object or objects, so this lends itself naturally to the demonstration speech. You also might want to incorporate a PowerPoint or an audio visual aid of some kind, video, things like that. But you will need to have a visual aid for this, and you also want to be thoughtful and be practicing with your visual aid or aids, because this is a speech where you're going to have to be balancing the visual aid with what you're saying. You also need to engage with the audience. So whether that's talking to the audience, asking them a question, or providing a handout that you go through with them, or even having some sort of volunteer participation, you do need to incorporate that into this speech. Again, you need to be clearly organized. That's something we're going to be talking about in the next few slides, but you want to have clear organization. This is especially important with a demonstration speech because if something is out of order, it could very, very easily confuse your audience or even confuse you as you're speaking. You're going to want to provide concrete detail. You're going to want to go in depth in your demonstration speech and show that you're an expert by providing tips and tricks and things that people might not know about or be able to Google and find easily. You'll want to have strong delivery. For this one, think about cooking shows, think about TV hosts, people that are showing you how to do stuff on, HGTV or Food Network. They use a lot of vocal emphasis, vocal variety, they have a lot of energy, and they have excellent eye contact. And then a requirement is that you are going to be submitting a full sentence outline for this speech the week that the speech is due. Now let's dive into organizing your speech. So I want you to keep in mind that the demonstration is part of the speech, and the speech includes the demonstration. These are not two separate things. You'll be speaking while you demonstrate, and this can be tricky because when you're working with objects, there can be lulls, so you need to be able to fill the time with explanations and tips. Now, talking about the organization of your speech a little bit more, the basic speech structure from informative to demonstration does not change much, but it will a little bit. You will need to have a minimum of 3 main points for this speech, and you need to have your main points organized into stages, not steps. And I wanted to reiterate that because I think that the book describes them as steps, so I've been describing them as steps, but while talking with other instructors on teaching this course, they describe them as stages, and I actually thought that made a lot more sense. So I just want to reiterate, think of your main points as stages, not steps. The body should not just be a mass of explanations and steps. Instead, you want to think of stages as part of the process. So you might have a topic that has 15 steps to demonstrate something. However, your main point should not be, you shouldn't have 15 main points. Instead, you want to think about how can you bundle those steps together into 3 main points. And so you have 3 main points with 5 steps each within them instead. And I am going to be providing an example of what this will look like in just a moment, but I do want to say that your stages do not have to have an equal number of steps within each one. That won't make sense for every topic. That was just a really easy way to quickly do the math in my brain. But we're going to be thinking of our main points in different stages rather than just thinking about the 15 steps it takes you to get through a process. And an example of how you might organize something into stages versus organizing them by steps is take the topic how to register to vote. The stages of how to register to vote in a speech outline might look like this. You might have your first stage as determining if you're eligible to vote. Your second stage or main point would be how you can vote in Illinois. And then your third stage or main point could be registering online and going through that process. And there might be, 20 different steps that you identify to this process, but you're able to put all of those steps into those 3 stages and your 3 main points. Some of them you'll talk about more than others. Others will just really be a sentence and then you move on. Now, when you are going to be organizing your speech, the demonstration speech lends itself well to chronological ordering. It's not always the case, but since you are going to be demonstrating how to do something from start to finish, typically it's going to make sense to organize it with time, so organizing chronologically. There are opportunities to organize your speech in a topical pattern. So for example, if you are teaching people how to do a specific yoga pose, maybe instead of organizing it chronologically, you want to organize by body part. So you go through each main point would be one part of the body, culminating at the end in doing the yoga pose. Now let's walk through an example of pulling the steps of a process into organized stages. This morning when I was putting this together, I thought clearly I had voting on my brain, probably because I've gotten a million voting ads lately. So I just decided to go with how to use a voting machine. And I've identified 4 different stages or 4 different main points that I would go through. The first main point is getting ready to vote. The second would be checking in at the polling place. The third would be preparing your ballot. And the fourth main point would be casting your ballot. And while I only have 4 main points outlined, in the next slide that you're going to see in a moment, I will show you how many actual steps I identified in that process that are then going to be boxed up, and you'll see that visually, and they will each belong with one of the main points. So looking at the actual steps on how to use a voting machine, their first 2 steps are, assembling your materials and being aware of candidates and issues, and those are going to go into the get ready to vote main points. Then this middle, the checking in at your polling place, has 4 steps within it. So it is going to be a little larger, a little bit more robust. I'm going to spend the most time talking about that in the classroom when I'm doing my demonstration speech. And that's okay, because sometimes with this specific speech, a stage is not always going to be equal to another stage. So you may be talking longer and at different points. And again, that is okay. And then my third stage, preparing your ballot, has just 2 steps within it. And then my final stage of casting your ballot, again, just has 2 different steps in it. Once you have an understanding of the steps of a process that you've chosen for your demonstration speech, then you can outline those stages or those main points, which means that you can really start putting together the rest of your speech in an organized fashion. So this is an example of how I would put together my preview for my demonstration speech, which again, like the informative speech, your introduction and your conclusion are going to look very similar. So you're still going to have all the same components. I'm still going to be looking for signposts or transition words, and I'm going to be looking for you to preview and summarize. And again, just keeping it simple. And that's why I wanted to show you an example of what those stages look like in a preview, because if you read through these, none of them are reinventing the wheel, but I'm hitting the requirements, and it's easy for my audience to understand what is going on in my speech. And I just wanted to reiterate that the introduction, again, it's going to look the same. You're going to have an attention getter, so review those attention getting devices in your book and try to challenge yourself. A lot of people rely on that rhetorical device in asking a question, so try to challenge yourself and see if maybe you can do something a little bit different this time. You also want to relate to the audience as usual. And again, try to challenge yourself and really enhance your speech by not just saying, hey, you need to listen because you need to listen, but why is this actually important? Why is this an important skill for them to have or to learn? You want to establish your credibility. This is incredibly important for this speech because we are relying on you to be an expert in an area, and we are going to expect that you are an expert in this area because you're teaching us how to do something. You'll need a thesis statement and preview your main points, which I just talked about previewing. And in the other lecture, I talk about the thesis statement a little bit, but I just wanted to reiterate that you need to have those things. And then in your conclusion, which I don't have a slide for that, you're going to want to summarize your main points or your stages within your conclusion, and you are going to want to provide a memorable close. So think about your attention-getting device when you're thinking about how to put together a memorable close. I always recommend, this is a really good way to just write in general, but coming full circle. So think about what you used for your attention getter and how can you repurpose that into a memorable close? How can you write something similar at the end? Or maybe you answer your question or something like that at the end of your speech. So you'll still have all of those components. The only difference is that instead we're going to be talking in stages for this one for your main points, but they're still main points. It's just you want to be organized in stages. So a few tips that I wanted to provide for this specific speech. Again, I just talked about this, but think specifically about why it's useful to the audience. You have to engage with your audience for this one, so you want them to be engaged. So think about that, think thoughtfully about it. Any sort of skill that you can provide, it's important to show people how to vote. It's important to teach people how to make something, make a food item or to do a DIY project. So think about, why it's useful to the audience and make sure you're letting them know that. Try not to provide long lists. When you tell people that you're going to give them a list, they tend to tune out, and it's very hard for people to remember all of the stages of a list. There's actual research that shows that people typically remember the beginning and the end the most, and so if you're providing a long list, they're going to forget all of the things in the middle. Also, you don't want to speak too mechanically on this one. You don't want to be using jargon that you're not going to explain. When you are providing a demonstration on a specific craft or hobby, it makes sense that there could be some jargon involved, but if you're using it, you just need to explain what that means or what that is so that your audience understands. And that's also a really good way to fill time. When you're doing something, there might be a lull. So if there are some, specific language that is used within that that craft, that hobby, that sport, whatever you're demonstrating, that might be a good time to teach your audience a couple of those different pieces of jargon so that they have those when they, maybe interact with people who actually do that thing you're demonstrating for a living or hobbyists themselves. And then for this speech, it is okay to address the audience directly. So you can use you. Again, I'm asking you to engage with the audience, so it's okay to do that. This is, I want you to be professional. I want you to think of yourself as being somebody who's presenting on television, on Food Network, on HGTV, on the DIY channel. I want you to think of yourself as a host. So I want you to be professional, but I also want you to be engaging and people to be interested in listening to you. So that is all I have for this demonstration lecture on organizing your speech. Please do go through all of the materials on Cobra, look them over. If you're having problems thinking of a topic, let me know. I'm happy to electronically hash some things out with you. I've recommended that people who did an informative speech on a certain topic try to bring it through to the demonstration speech and persuasive speech if possible. So if you need to talk about it, just let me know. And your demonstration speech topics are going to be due by this Friday at 11 p.m. via email. So get on it. Thanks for listening.